So, hello everybody, and welcome to ProductTank Madrid. I'm really happy to have three amazing product managers today with us, and we will be discussing a topic that is really relevant for everybody that's in the industry, called managing product is managing tension. I'm sure that if you've been working as a product manager, you've had this challenge, and Marc has been very kind to organize this product tank and open the conversation, and he's actually wrote a book about it, and he'll be leading the moderation. As always in Product Tank, what we really want to do is have a conversation. This is not a monologue. So we'll be talking ourselves, and then we will open the floor for questions from your side. And also we are here, product management is always about learning. So if you have any comments or you have any points of view, we would be really happy to hear about them too, okay? So Marc, the floor is all yours. So, and thanks Natalia, Marc, and Sebastian for joining us and being part of this conversation for ProductTank Madrid.
Thank you so much for having us, and thank you Natalia and Sebastian as well. So really excited to talk about managing product and how that equals managing tension. And yes, there's a book that I wrote about this, mostly based on some of my own experiences, but also some of my lessons learned and lots of other product people that I interviewed for this book. But don't worry, because it's not going to be a standard, boring book presentation. That's not what tonight's Product Tank is about. What we will do is talk about where I believe tension comes from when we talk about product management. Because for me, product management is almost like a sum of the mind, particularly of the people that we work with or that we're accountable to, customers, matter, so what the product is made of. So think about a physical product could be made out of plastic, and that it's got its own mind and might not be as malleable and as flexible as you'd like it to be. Or think about software code, which is quite binary, black or white. And then the moves that we make or don't make in relation to our product. So the decisions that we make, whether we decide to even start working on a product or we decide to terminate, prioritization decisions, those three elements, mind, matter, moves, for me equal product management and what we do as product people, but equally create a lot of tension. And it's the tension side of things that we're going to speak about tonight with the amazing panel, and hopefully get your thoughts as well and your questions. So to begin with, we've got a few talking points that we're going to dive into. We're going to talk about stakeholder management and how you work with stakeholders, how you influence when you don't have any authority over your stakeholders or the people that you work with and that you depend upon. We'll talk about how we deal as product people with uncertainty, particularly now in these crazy times, and some of the unknowns that we have to face. And we'll also spend some time thinking about the risk of feeling overwhelmed as a product person, because we're dealing with a lot, as we've just seen in that equation. We're dealing with the mind, we're dealing with matter, we're dealing with moves. And how do you keep all those different balls up in the air? Like we said, we've got a great panel. I'm still hoping that two of our panelists, Marivi Breeze, who's head of product development at Telefonica, and Barbara Lopez Garcia, who's the CPO at the Hotels Network, will be able to join us very soon. But not to worry, because we've got Natalia already on the call, who's a senior product manager at Eventbrite, is actually based in Buenos Aires, is one of the organizers of Product Tank Buenos Aires. I love how Natalia wrote in her brief bio that she is the mother of one, but also that she learns by doing. So I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about what that means, learn by doing, and how that relates in terms of some of the challenges and the tensions that we'll be talking about tonight. And then we've also got Sebastián Honores Espejo. I'm sure I really messed up your name, Sebastian, there.
Amazing pronunciation, Marc.
I did my best. Who is a director of product at Fever, but also a veteran at Booking.com, where he's worked for many years. So he's got over 10 years of experience in e-commerce, and I'm sure he's also in a good position to talk a bit more about some of the challenges, the frustrations, and the tensions that we face as product people. So at this point, I'll stop sharing my screen and I'm going to kick off some of the questions. I can see that Marivi is in, so we might have to let her in just to add to the panel and get more perspectives. Hi, Marivi. Thank you so much for joining us. I just did a brief introduction. Marivi is the head of product development at Telefonica, where she, among many other things, she defines the global roadmap, works on the delivery strategy, and describes herself as an entrepreneur. So an entrepreneur, but inside Telefonica. So I'd love to talk a bit more about that and some of the tensions that brings. And I think we've got Barbara as well. Hi, Barbara.
Hi.
Who is the Chief Product Officer at the Hotels Network. And that's after a career as a product manager, mostly working for a wide range of tech companies for the last 15 years. So thank you so much for joining me. And already, Marivi and Barbara, I did a very brief introduction on the topic of tonight. And I want to start off by repeating what Alex said before. If you got any questions at any point, drop them in. Because we will be picking them up after the first 20 minutes or so when we have a broader Q&A session. So I want you to be very honest with me and with the audience, and tell me, when was the last time you felt tension as a product person? I can tell, I'll start actually. Tension I was dealing with, and I work at a company called ASOS, e-commerce company based in London. One of the products, if you want to call it that, is the homepage that I'm looking after. And one of the current tensions is, how do we find a balance between constantly improving the customer experience and innovating on the homepage, which is obviously the storefront for ASOS, versus more business as usual kind of activity where we want to promote Black Friday activities. We have specific campaigns running. So you can see that is a very simple tension that I'm working through with my product team, is like, how do we find that balance, right? How do we manage tension between innovation and, important business as usual activity? So that's my example. Natalia, if I can start with you, when was the last time you felt tension?
While working in Eventbrite, I was in charge of refunds part in Eventbrite. It's an event company, and then the pandemic. So refunds become the star of the company, and the tension was to manage the features on the facilities for the creators of the events and from the attendees, that they want the money back, and the creators that they have not the money to send back to the attendees. So yes, I think that that was the last time I felt that manage this balance between this part of the e-commerce.
Excellent. Good example already. Sebastian, tell me honestly, when was the last time you felt the tension?
So same as Natalia, where this was related to the COVID, right? In my case, it was the fact that user support at Fever was swamped because of all the COVID-related issues, reschedules, cancellations, etc. So there was a big backlog that was growing. And we also saw that there was a significant time that every agent took per ticket. So the proposal that came from user support was to automate some tasks for agents, which needed, of course, a product and tech support, and that became pretty urgent. And the issue was, and the tension was that there were extensive requirements and expectations about what this task needed to entail. So multiple channels, because customers could reach out to us via multiple channels. Also entails multiple use cases, right? Before a purchase, after a purchase, for instance. And we have taken multiple weeks to develop. So the fact that it was that extensive make it also not too high in the prioritization, because of course 3 or 4 weeks of development will also bring you down in the prioritization, but at the same time there was a sense of urgency to make this happen. And the fact that even if you take 4 weeks to develop something, then it wasn't that urgent to begin with. So
classic.
that was the last, the last development or the last tension I was faced with.
Wow, that sounds like a classic scenario. Marivi, how about you? Tell us honestly, when was the last moment you felt tension or like a challenging situation as a product person at Telefonica?
I think that daily. I mean, today was my last day, so that I felt tension. First of all, sorry because I was delayed. I was in another meeting and everything was like so disaster. And for example, one of the main tensions that we were handling today is that I'm working in video and entertainment product. So in the pandemic times, a lot of people is starting to use multiple devices. We have a lot of concurrent users. For example, in Peru, we have there are some soccer games that are already started, and people there love soccer, so they are working and they have the streaming service by the side. They have the TV, they have all the connectivity in their home, and our main tension was with the operations and support team because they wanted to cut the service in some users, and we as a product and we are generating a lot of value and revenue, and we do not want to cut the service. We want to find another way to make it scalable, or we want to find another way to give a solution to the users. So we were trying to make a division of some headends of the CDNs that are supporting all the content. And at the end, instead of having all the region in one node, we are going to be dividing the nodes so we can handle that increase of the usage of our product instead of just cutting the service. So that kind of tensions, I think that with the operations team or with the technology team, it's like my daily issue. And sometimes it's a healthy tension, I think, but in another cases, it's a tension that sometimes we need to find that sweet spot, right? Like there is not like too much balance for giving all the support to users and not to forget that we have another infrastructure to keep going. So that's the balance that I'm trying to handle as a product manager.
Wow, yeah, your example, as it happens, sounds quite similar to Sebastian's example, that example of scale and covering different use cases. Barbara, how about you? Last time you felt that kind of attention?
I think we are all in the same thing. Yeah, like COVID brought us to some scenario where you really need to prove how quick and fast you are for real. So during the last months, we changed. We work for hotels mainly. Yeah. So the moment we learned they were gonna close internationally, and without knowing when they will reopen, it was the time to work together with them and keep doing things. Yeah, to keep working. So we launched few new projects, and it has to be really quick. So it was when we talk about breaking the project in pieces and delivering value from the first moment, that was my first real time I had to do that. Like the time was so short and it worked actually. And I can tell at the moment it's working really well, but it put all us in a situation that nobody was sleeping in the company. It's like, okay, we have to do this. Yeah.
And that's an interesting one in itself. And Alex, I'll come to you in a second because you're the organizer, but I still want to know about any tensions you've felt but that even at scale, because that's a trade-off, isn't it? Scale versus speed. Speed you mentioned actually, Barbara, to customer experience, and sometimes it's that iron triangle between time, scope, and budget. I think it is, right? And one of those has to give, and sometimes you make decisions purely, as you say, Barbara, because of speed, and quality, for instance, or budget might suffer as a result. So thank you for sharing that. And last but not least, Alex, you want to share attention with us?
Yeah, sure. It's my second round in the financial services industry. So the biggest tension I see in this industry is cybersecurity, data protection, and product. And balancing those tensions is always a challenge. So you want to make things secure and data protect it, and create products.
It's one of the
that's
tensions I actually
too.
spend quite a bit of time on in the book, where I talk about, especially when you work in fintech and stuff, you have the regulator on your case all the time. So it's not just the customer, but absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. So that's really helpful. And we've got some themes already. And what we haven't really talked about in those examples, which gives us a good starting point, is about stakeholder management. Because I find, I don't know if you agree with me, a lot of the tension, not only from the circumstances and the kind of product that we're managing, and you've given us some examples, but a lot of the tension comes from the people that we work with.
Yeah.
Fair? Yeah? So
Totally.
I want to bring in maybe Sebastian at this point. Tell me what for you is an ideal stakeholder. Just very briefly, what kind of characteristics make a good stakeholder you can really work with?
Couple of things. So first of all, you need to be resourceful and creative, so that they are aware that product is not the only solution. Because it will quickly become product is just the solution for every problem, and sometimes probably just making a quick landing page with things that are already at hand could be a shortcut. Also, the fact that they should have a global view, right, of the situation, so that they are able to make trade-offs even before coming to you, right? So if I ask that, the probably product wouldn't be able to deliver on this, which is more important. So having this pre-filter, say. Another point would be also the fact that the vision should be defined and consistent, so that we're able to think along, to align, and even anticipate on those needs, right? I don't only want to be the person following up instructions, but I also want to be the one generating those ideas. If I know what you are about, what your vision is, then I could anticipate on that.
Yeah.
And probably, okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. And some of the things you talk about there, that having that vision, being able to think more big picture, I think is some really good calls. Now, who wants to volunteer? Otherwise, I'll pick on someone. What makes a difficult stakeholder? You don't have to, name names, but this is a safe space. We're all product managers. What makes a difficult stakeholder?
I
can answer.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No.
I can give an example, and maybe we can give an example each other.
Yeah, exactly. Start, Marie.
For example, I don't know. For me, in the prioritization process, in the roadmap, for me the worst kind of stakeholder is the hippo that wants to interact with the group of the product managers and wants to create something with the team, but at the end is not the correct way to go, because doesn't have enough insights from the users, enough data to take decisions. But just because he's the highest paid people in the room, he wants to be part. So I think that for me, that's the worst part to manage. I've been working a lot with data to make sure that people understand why we say no. Saying no is really hard. So I say no, but with a lot of data, with a lot of user insights behind. So it's easier, but you have to be patient. You have to make a process to make these people go on board, to understand the process by itself of the prioritization. So for me, that's the worst kind of stakeholder.
And I think we've all, I don't know, at this point, the audience, I'd love if you could drop a comment and share with us if you work with a hippo and if want any tips, because I think we've all worked with people, whether the highest paid or they're just very vocal, or they've got an amazing sounding job title. And how do you deal with that, right? Really, 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 yeah, that's difficult. And we'll talk more about that. Barbara, I think you also had a good, some thoughts on what makes a difficult stakeholder.
Well, I wanted to point the fact that sometimes when you are working with someone, he must be really scared of something, scared or insecure or missing pieces of information. That's hard. So you need to really understand how he is and how he feels, to empathize, and help him, to change the state. Otherwise, it doesn't work at all. So yeah, that happens very often. Actually, it's not very sophisticated.
And I think you touched on a really good point there, Barbara, that kind of empathy point, because it's very easy, you know, again, we're product people and we can make jokes about hippos and difficult stakeholders, but equally they have their own pressures, they have their own information, they have their own agendas. And our role, I think, and it'd be good to hear what you think as well, is to bring those people on our journey, basically, right? It's not about who's got the best title or who's right or wrong, but that we are, at least, as Barbara says, understand each other's viewpoints. Natalia, did you have anything to add to that, to the difficult stakeholder?
Yeah, I think that in general, every stakeholder that never has worked with a product team, in general, is not a good stakeholder because they don't know the process. They just ask for resolving the problems. And I think that one thing that a product manager needs to do is to walk through this process, explain, have empathy, and is trying to convert the bad stakeholder in a one that is functional for the team, I think.
So that's a good point, and that leads me to ask you a question, and maybe I'll start with Marivi, if that's okay. How do you know, you've got a really great role at Telefonica, but I can imagine it's a massive company with lots of people with, you know, above you that you depend upon. They have their own opinions and priorities, and that's all good stuff. And we've just heard the importance of empathizing and understanding where they're coming from. But how do you influence those people that you might not have authority over? And actually applies, I would say, also to maybe engineers that don't report into you, or designers that don't report into you, but you really need them, right, to, as you say, deliver the roadmap.
I think that the most important part, I think, is if you have the passion of what are you doing and you have that storytelling and the product pitch and everyone feels part of the project, I think that's like the best way to manage with or without any authority. And I think that another important point is to set expectations, not to oversell. And sometimes for us it's really hard because we need to pass through different stages of go no go, and we need to kind of make a special sale of what we are going to do and how it's going to be scaling and how it's going to impact the business. But at the end, I prefer to set the expectations, and once everybody know where are the limitations, then we can move forward and as fast as we can. I also think that instead of just imposing the ideas, it's like talk with everybody and make everybody participating in all the discussions to bring important topics to the table and to discuss them. I think that that's like how we can manage that. And sometimes the trade-off is that we need to manage our agendas. We need to have a lot of meetings, but that's the only way, like communicating and making feel all the people important in this process.
And I like what you're saying about transparency. And I'm looking at some of the questions that we're getting in comments, which is great. Keep them coming, please. Because Reiner is saying, what is a stakeholder? In my definition, it's anyone who's got a stake in the product or the problem that we're trying to solve. So that's not just the CEO or the CEO or someone, but it can also be an engineer and designer. And those are typically people that we really need to get on board and bring on that journey, as we said, if we want to deliver a product, if we want to solve a problem for the customer. So it's a whole range of people actually, but anyone who's got a stake in the product, including ourselves. That's the tricky bit. And Sebastian, if I can ask you, because Amanda, who is the, as it happens, she also made a good comment. She's one of the organizers of ProductTank Hong Kong. So I don't know what the time difference is, but thank you so much for joining, Amanda. But she's talking about trust, which we haven't talked about before. We talked about empathy and relationships. How do you instill trust, specifically if you work, when I think about your booking.com days, where, that's a huge company, a bit like Marivi is describing, lots of offices around the world, I can imagine. lots of people who come in and out. You don't have how do you still establish like trust? Have you got any tips or thoughts there, or lessons that you learned whilst you were at Booking?
I would say the first one is just focus on delivering, right? Because results speak by themselves. So if you're able to do that, then you will open multiple doors, right? And that's just a kind of where an intangible capital you have that you build within your company, right? The second one I would say is making sure that by influencing, you are also looking at what the other person wants. What are your objectives, right? And then finding the closest common denominator. And start building from there, right? You start building from there, and then you start co-creating, right? So that not the problem, nor the solution, is just something that you built in your corner, and then you came a couple of weeks later with the Holy Grail. That process needs to be visible, right? If it's not, then I will mistrust it, right? Because I didn't walk the path you walked through in order to come up with that solution.
And I think you make two really good points there, really interesting, which I want to build on with you, Natalia, because Sebastian is talking about trust and co-creation, and also understanding where the other person is coming from and filtering that into the relationship, right? Because it's very easy, even for us as product people, to think, this is my tunnel vision, that's what I'm going for, right? Very easy. I've made that mistake, and I talk about that in the book quite openly. Have you got any thoughts on how you, as you say, co-create, especially because with Eventbrite, I can imagine, as you say, you work with customers who go to events, but you also work with the event creators.
Yeah, in co-creations, well, I think that it maybe say that to make the people feel part of the project and owners. When I have a project, and specifically with this crisis of the pandemic, I bring some solutions for the problems that we have, but I put my proposals in the table with the developers, with the designers, and with all. Okay, that is my proposal. Please, this is a problem that we have. Let's propose other solutions and prioritize all this project together. This is the thing I made, because you can just say the last word in that, or the stakeholder maybe has not the view or the complete problem in complex things and urgent things to resolve. But it's my way to get commitment from the developers, from the designers, or also from stakeholders. When a stakeholder asks from me, hey, when you will prioritize this thing? And I say, okay, we will do together. When we see that the numbers or this problem need to be prioritized, we will decide to prioritize that. But I focalize on that. I'm not who take the decision alone, because nobody wants orders, or nobody wants just to believe in you because you are the product manager.
Thank you. And one thing that I've thought about, particularly last couple of months, obviously with COVID and stuff, but I would say it's a normal thing for us product people, is dealing with uncertainty. We work on solving problems. We work on products where there's a lot of unknowns, things we don't know about the product, things we don't know whether the customer even wants it or how they're going to react. And Barbara, if I can talk to you, if I can get your thoughts, because it sounded like from your example, you had a lot of uncertainty with Hotels Network when you suddenly had to shut them all down. But what is interesting, and that's why I want to ask you about, generally as product people, how do you deal with uncertainty, knowing that a lot of people that you work with, whether it's someone who's works in accounting or as an engineer, they don't like uncertainty. That's not part of their job, right? It's quite need the numbers. Or so how do you deal with that tension, Barbara? Have you got any tips or any thoughts on that?
Well, we talk a lot about this the last times, especially with the CEO, the CTO, and we were talking about this today, and it's like we try to keep focus and not get distracted by the last thing happening. Yeah, it's very easy to get lost, and also sometimes focus on the corner cases that will never happen.
Mm.
So when we start building, even the tech team or anyone, it's very easy to get distracted. So we just try to keep focus on the plan proposed and keep doing, keep working and doing a great job. And actually, I can tell in this experience and during the last month, it worked really well. We could be wrong, was not the case, but still, it's quite difficult to do this thing I just explained now.
Yeah, no, totally. I totally get that, because one of the things that I find sometimes, a bit like Natalia was saying, we do this together and stuff. But when people ask me questions or they say, is this product going to work or is the customer going to buy it? And then I say, quite honestly, I don't know. Let's test it. I've seen a lot of nervous faces over the years. How do you deal with that?
I wanted, if I can chip in.
Yeah, of course.
We're all very focused on COVID. I would like to share an experience I had when I was working in as head of product in Career Shifters. So it's a UK company, and suddenly Brexit happened, and the pound started to drop, and most of our payments were in US dollars. So you have more costs, you have less money coming in, and one thing that really, really helped us move through that was focusing on objectives and key results and saying, okay, we need to make 1,000, 2,000 or 3,000 tickets so that the thing balances, so we don't get into debt. And that helped us put a lot of focus on doing lots of experiments and stuff to see if we could actually make more money. And that was very, very helpful. And sometimes uncertainty brings focus if you know what you need to do to get out of the red and get into black again, right?
Yeah, gotcha. And I'm just, before we hand it over to questions from the audience, and I see I keep my eye on the comments, a lot of good conversation already, but if you've got questions, please drop them in there. Because you touched on it, some of you touched on it in the beginning, about saying no and feeling overwhelmed. Because with all of this, especially when it's crazy times like it is now, but even when it isn't super crazy times, I personally find that being a product person can be really overwhelming, right? Because you're dealing with all these tensions that we talked about. How, Sebastian, maybe start with you. How have you got a tip for anyone who's on the call, listening to us tonight, thinking, yeah, I'm feeling overwhelmed? How can we help them? Have you got any tips?
Well, I think there are a couple of things related to being overwhelmed. I think the first one is even the motivation, that there's a motivation component to what you're doing, right? So if you come back to the reasons why you're doing something, right? Regardless of the content or of the particular situation that you're involved on, I think it's always about ROI, right? So the amount of tension in this case is the investment, but then what is your return, right? And I think if you understand this return properly, then you could be able to kind of stand more pressure, right? I would say also, if you still don't feel overwhelmed, but you are probably in the process of, or you're starting a product career, I would say first anticipate on that, right? Eventually, you could just take for granted that at some point you're going to be overwhelmed if you are in product and probably in many other kind of careers, right?
Yeah.
So you need to have a system or have a compass. Meaning define values, define ways of working, priorities, etc., which they all can entail pre-made decisions, right? A decision that you made upfront, so that when the moment comes, you really know what to do. You don't need to be thinking kind of with all the pressure in there. You already have your philosophy, say. So that's another point, and I think. Something that you mentioned in the chapter 7 in your book, related to understanding really the problem, right? I think you quote Charles Kettering, say a problem well stated is a problem half solved, right? In that sense, in my personal experience, being able to state the problem properly, even creating a tree of problems, right? Because there are multiple things when you feel overwhelmed. It's not just a symptom, it's multiple things, in trying to make sense out of that already give me peace of mind. So, yeah, those are the three things. And looking at the return of that overwhelmness, anticipate on them, and also try to really understand where this situation comes from.
Thank you for that. And Natalia, if I can, you talk about learn by doing. If you give one piece of advice to anyone listening and watching us tonight who's feeling overwhelmed, what could they do to maybe feel, as Sebastian says, accepted, or maybe feel less overwhelmed?
Well, in my experience, the same that you apply to manage your roadmap, your project, so it's the same you need to apply to your own work. Prioritize, order, say what amount of work need any task. Be honest when it's enough, and you can manage more than you have in the plate, and ask for help and give visibility. And sometimes to have good tools to communicate, good documents, distribute this in the correct channels or in the correct way, reduce a lot the day-to-day work. Because if you in some way delegate with your teams, you trust in your teams, everybody has the context to keep working and know the results and know the whys, is about less questions, less emails, and be more productive in the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Less questions, less emails, definitely. I say yes to that. But there's another thing. Marivi mentioned it right at the beginning of our conversation, which I think is a very powerful way of, managing feeling overwhelmed and maybe stop feeling overwhelmed. It was a 2-letter word. It wasn't rude, but you talked about saying no. How do you say no without upsetting people or, not losing your job?
I think that maybe you can have like there three important parts of the speech. The first is every time you say no, make sure that you have a reference using numbers. Like taking data-driven decisions is the best way to make sure that you are using the truth, or you are reducing the ambiguity or the uncertainty. Second one, if you believe really in the user and you have the different methodologies using user-centered design, make sure that you always have a user insight that comes with all your statements. Like if you will say no, it's because the user already say no in some research or in some qualitative study or whatever. But make sure that you have the feedback from the user. And the other one is like, I will add, like in your book as well, you were saying that a good product manager maybe is also a psychologist, right? So I think that a good part of becoming a psychologist is like to understand why the people is responding to a no with some behaviors. So if you understand and you are more empathic and you understand why that person responds with some feeling, then you can have another way to make it like a workaround and make sure that is a no, but not a personally no, but also you have the statements to convince or to persuade the person. So I think that using that 3 parts, you will be good saying no. Like there is no way to become a different challenger. It's just like it's the truth, like how you back up with data, users, and feelings.
And on a personal level, maybe, Barbara, if I can bring you in there, like, I still feel for you for the craziness from what you had to do with the hotels. But, how do you also say no to yourself in a way where you think, you mentioned about not sleeping, maybe you can do that for a few days, a few weeks if you're lucky, but that's not, you can't keep doing that, right? So have you got tips where you, to yourself and to the people that you work with, where you say, I've got too much on my plate, something has to give, or I have to say no?
Look, this is the most difficult to answer, because in the last year, I totally changed my mind on this, and we are trying to work completely different that I have been working before until now, which is default to yes and tomorrow. So what does this mean? Whatever it comes to our daily work, we will say yes. What it means, is like, of course, we cannot do everything at the same time, but we will try to really give an answer to everybody. To don't wait for, because we saw that it's something that is like almost magic. People doesn't get blocked, frustrated. So if there is a no, it will come naturally by working with them. I will not need to convince them. So again, it's a matter of prioritization. But
Right.
There's a yes after another yes, so it's crazy like that. Yeah.
Yes.
If I can contribute to this one, one thing is a previous boss I had gave me the book of the one thing, and it was like, what is the one thing we need to focus on? And it's like one thing and only one. And no, but we need to do this, this, and this. No, one thing, and all the other things will start to put together behind that one thing. And that also helps me a lot, like saying, what is the one thing I really need to focus that will make other things like less difficult or actually irrelevant. And that helps me a lot.
Let's bring in some of the questions on some of the topics that we talked about. So, for instance, Sandra, who's I think joining us from Germany, which is amazing. She asks us about our experiences with push rather than pull communication. So push, I think she means more proactive communication, if I'm right. Have you got examples there of how you say no proactively almost, or manage expectations proactively?
I could try to answer that question.
Yeah.
I would say in a big organization, of course, you're going to have multiple stakeholders, and your work is going to be scrutinized by many people. And I think that's okay. I also see some comments saying that we need to have a better definition of stakeholder, because it couldn't be that everyone is a stakeholder. Point taken, but at the same time, we need to be aware that our work is going to be scrutinized no matter what. And for that, more than limiting the number of stakeholders, we just need to limit our channels, right? And actively manage the channels on which people reach out to a product, right? So that we're actually kind of productizing those channels as well. Because I think, for instance, I have seen in many cases that there's an idea box in the organization, right? So everyone is sending ideas to product, and we perceive that as actually positive and doesn't do any harm. In my experience, it's quite harmful, because on one hand, where you don't close the loop on many of those ideas, and therefore the expectations keep on building up, and those ideas keep on lingering there, right? And in some situations, if you want to hear the voice of everyone in the company, it's better to send a survey to everyone, get the results, analyze them, come back to the main conclusions, send those conclusions back to the company, and say, this is what we learned from this process, and this is what we're going to do. So you actually actively kind of own the sentiment and the ideas from our people, but then you also set those expectations. The worst that could happen is that you just leave a channel open that no one responds to, or just you have too many channels, right? And therefore, formalize that I would say is the best way around.
And is there anything in terms of proactive when you're dealing with a live situation? So obviously the example Sebastian gave is more like you open it up and you identify the channels. But again, if I think, Marivi, to go back to your example where you've got the, was it the Peruvian soccer games and breaking it down, right? I personally can find that really tricky sometimes when I'm in that situation. I'm thinking, yeah, I need to be proactive and keep everyone in the loop. But at the same time, I'm trying to solve a problem, right? And in your case, quite an imminent problem.
Yeah, for us, sometimes we have like 2 or 3 tools. We use the open spaces. We have a talk every 2 weeks or every month, so we can tell everybody what's going on, what's new, what we are working on, and if they want to come on board, they want to become beta testers or whatever, they can join. So that's like one part of how we make everyone part of the project. Then we have before we had a monthly subscription that we send to all the company what we were doing, what were the results, but it implied a lot of work for us. So at the end, we open a channel. So everybody that wants to give us feedback or wants to be on board, we just invite them to these open spaces or invite them to the sometimes we have co-creations workshops, so we invite all the people to these times, and there they can work with us. However, it's really hard when you are working in a big company because there are a lot of areas, a lot of people want to participate, so you have to make sure that you manage their expectations as well. Like they can participate, but they have a limitation, right? And the other thing is that since our roadmap works with a lot of areas, we give a lot of visibility about the roadmap, so everybody knows where we are, what we are doing, why we did the prioritization. So I think that it's like a way where you can go ask information by yourself, and if you cannot find the answers there, you can question by the channels.
Yeah, no, that is definitely, that transparency and that ongoing transparency about what you're doing, and then getting people to be part of that. I see a comment from Rainer who's talking about if you share that and if you have strong KPIs, for instance, underpinning your roadmap, and be clear about what success looks like, helps. At this point, because I'm conscious of time, so I want to do maybe a final shout out for people if they have specific questions on the things that we talked about, the things we haven't talked about, all to do with tensions that can, as we said, can come from anywhere. Please share those questions with us. Because I have one, and in the absence of that, I'm going to ask one question.
I have a question as well, if I can make it to the
oh wow
to the panelists.
You go, Marie-V. Ask the question.
I don't know, it's like I'm trying to push the lean budgets, and since we are working in a company that usually works with annual budgets, it's really hard to make sure that we can, like, instead of just having annual reviews or annual meetings or annual KPIs, our product keeps going, and it doesn't matter if it's a year, a closing year or whatever. So we need like the whole time to have a budget or source of resources available, so we can pull instead of being pushing like we need more, or we need to end the year and after we can ask for more. So I don't know, how are you managing these kind of resources, or if you have been using the lean budgets before?
I definitely have, because I've worked in startups where everything is very lean, right? No, the problem is very real. I don't want to make fun of it, because that's the difficulty, right? Because it's that chicken and egg where you have to say, I want to get budget for something, and then someone, typically the CFO and that finance team will say, well, you need to commit to X, Y, and Z for that budget, right? One thing that I have seen working is work with your finance team to say, can we split that? Can we split the budget in kind of more cycles, so it's not just annual, but you have check-in points, which still means that you can go for a specific KPI or specific metric that you need to commit to, and on the basis of which you give you get your budget. But at least it gives you the flexibility to every quarter to assess what you've used up on your budget, how you're progressing against the KPI, for instance. So that I have seen working. But again, I appreciate it, particularly in more traditional big corporate companies, you have that challenge. Anyone else has got any experiences there with, trying to be more lean in terms of budgeting and delivering accordingly?
I would recommend a book called Succeeding with Agile from Mike Cole, and that book is like, okay, everybody knows Agile, but how do you bring it to a waterfall organization? And it's about mindset, right? Like if you've been working for 30 years with annual budgets, good luck with changing that way of working, right? So
Totally.
maybe having that budget and you split it up in months and making like an experiment could help, right? I think I always joke that there's a problem sometimes. I've also worked in startups. There's a problem when you have too much money. If you have very little money, there's no budgeting discussion. It's like, hey, run or we're out of business. We're out of business, right? But I think it's more coaching, understanding empathy, understanding how they think, and putting yourself in the guys of finance shoes and trying to, where you work how to change that. And it's a big challenge if you be working in a big corporation. So
Thanks.
From my
Sebastian.
experience, so where this only works is if you're able to track the value that you generate very quickly, right? It's even changing the kind of the paradigm, right? Instead of using budget, just doing ROI, right? I know that marketing works that way. So as long as you generate, if you put €1 and you get €2 in return, so keep on bringing money, right? So there's no reason to restrict that amount of euros as long as you're getting more back. So that could also be a way to present it, because like any rational decision maker would say, well, if you're bringing twice as much as I'm giving you, I'm gonna just give you as much as you want. Eventually, you're gonna have a diminishing returns, but then the only catch there is that you need to be able to really track down to probably the penny the impact that your team is having.
But how do you, any experience, because to me, it still feels a bit chicken and egg, because sometimes to prove the ROI, you need to experiment, right? Which is hard to do if you have to commit to a certain budget or a plan up front. Has anyone got any experience, going back to the very beginning of the conversation where we talked about working with other people? I'm now careful not to talk about stakeholders because I don't want to get bogged down in definitions, but people who don't necessarily, are new to experimentation and that mindset of not knowing but figuring it out and trying. Have you got, again, to your point, Alex, about changing mindset, have you got any tips or any lessons learned for the audience and how you go about that?
I would say
Barbara, I'm going to start. Yes, because I saw you speaking first. Thank you. Sorry, Sebastian.
Sure.
No, I was listening before Sebastian pointing the fact of identifying the problems, which looks very easy, but it's quite difficult. So many times when you see projects in a roadmap and you want to assign budget or you keep a plan for a quarter or a year, every time you go back to the problem you are trying to solve, it becomes more easy. It's difficult to go there, and it's difficult for everybody to understand. But I have been doing even lean canvas for some companies when I first joined, and when you are seeing the problem the main company is trying to solve, sometimes you get to very crazy points, like why are we doing this instead of doing this other thing, So it's very rational at the end, but it's very difficult to point. That's why we always avoid and we go straight to the solution, because the other part, it takes a lot of work. But I will say that keeping the problem and then the ROI you are going to get from that, it's key to build all this. I will say that it's really, really important. It's one of the points that I really agree with. Yeah.
And one thing I was just coming to my mind again about managing tension, and sorry to chip in again, but when you define very well the problem and you have very different people with very different ways of thinking, like technology, design, cybersecurity, but you actually define the problem and you get all those tensions together thinking on how to solve that problem, that tension can be actually magic, because everybody puts their best point of view and you can get a very good product. But the key is defining very well the problem, and I think that's something that you mentioned in your book, and I think it's really, really important to go to the problem. That's what we were talking about.
And that's maybe, you talked about the magic of tension, and maybe it's a good point to end there, because I haven't seen more questions coming through, and that means that I'm going to ask the final question to you, and maybe start with Natalia, if that's okay. What in your mind is the difference between the kind of, healthy tension that Alex described, and Marivi mentioned it as well, and unhealthy tension? And you can give an example if that's, just to share, if you know.
Well, unhealthy tension is when the people in the team don't feel okay with this tension. Probably it's about tension, because at the end of the day, all of our persons, people working together, and if you have someone in the team or a stakeholder or whatever pushing too much, or not hearing what the rest of the team or the rest of the people is or not empathizing with the problems of the others, I think that this is the bad pressure, or when the people, as you know, when a highest position want to push someone in the roadmap, or want to have the last word in something. But it's easy for me. It's easy to recognize how the people feels about that.
Marivi, unhealthy difference between healthy and unhealthy tension, your experience?
Healthy definitely makes everybody go directly to the goal, to the objective. And even though sometimes people feel like not comfortable, it makes them move from their status quo. So I think that's a healthy tension. Unhealthy tension is that definitely you are not seen as part of the project, of the product. People starting to sabotage the project, and I think that's the kind of bad tension. So at the end, we're managing people. When we are managing a product, we are managing relationships. So we need to make sure that relationships work, and how they can be optimized. Sometimes people don't like to work with another people, so instead of pushing that, maybe it can be like experimenting with people as well, like creating different squads or groups, and you can find there who is willing to work with who, and make it like pushing and go towards the objective.
Cool, thank you. Before we wrap up, I want one sentence from all of you, and I'll start, but just in one sentence, if we talk about people, building on what you said just now about healthy tension, how we can almost make the most of some of the tensions that we talked about tonight, and see them as a force of good and embrace them, right? Maybe it's hard to think about that in the moment, but for now we can do that, right? One tip, one sentence for people listening, thinking, yeah, some of those tensions, how can you possibly make the most of that? That's impossible. And we're saying it could be possible. What can we do? I'll give you one, which I cover in the book, is what's it called? A liberating kind of conversation structure, where, obviously if you have a bit of trust with someone, you have a bit of relationship, but you ask really difficult questions, or you go, what if, we stop doing this? A bit like Barbara was saying, I think, where you really get to the heart of the problem and saying, well, let me play devil's advocate. If our competitor starts doing this tomorrow, what if, right? And just if both parties involved in that conversation know that it's a safe space, and we're thinking out loud. And again, I'm not saying it's easy, but it really helps, in my experience, to make the most of that tension, and actually use that tension to actually come up with solutions, because you've looked at some doomsday scenarios, or you asked really hard questions. So that's my tip. Anyone, maybe if I can start with you, Sebastian, would you have one tip for people thinking, okay, how can I make the most of some of the tensions that we talked about?
I like one of the points you make in the book about using constraints as a way to simplify a problem, right? So tension could be a constraint, like you have these limitations, and sometimes those limitations are not good, but sometimes they just reduce a complexity, right? So instead of deciding between 20 things which require probably a very sophisticated decision system. Now you need to decide amongst 3. So reduce complexity, 100%.
Cool. Natalia?
Well, I have to agree with Sebastian about the simplify and split the problem in little problems. It's reduce sometimes the pressure, because a big problem is overwhelming people, but little problems are more easy to handle.
Barbara, you've definitely seen some tension fairly recently. What's your tip if you want to make the most of that tension?
It's something I'm learning still, which is like before I used to own the tensions, the problems, it was all for myself. And now what I'm really doing is sharing this, like it's our tension, if it's good, if it's bad. So I'm seeing the team tipping me all the time, like we should look at this, we should look at that, we should change this, let's go here, let's go there, And it's not my own thing anymore. It's our tension, and we deal with that as a team. That's the magic part of it. So I'm really loving the moment we are now. I invite you to share your tensions.
Thank you. Yeah, we should all make a collective fest. Marivi, finish with you. One tip if people want to actually optimize those tensions that we talked about.
I will say something that you also mentioned in your book, that it's like to make sure that the cognitive, you call it the cognitive diversity. So make sure that everybody knows which is their value, that we have a diversity in the group, and everybody gives some ideas, even though they are different. Make sure that if it generates attention, it's because we are trying to build up something like a team, like a sport, like you are working as a teamwork. And I think that for me is like make sure that everybody understands what's their value, what's their role, and how they are part of this project. So that's how I should say that we can take out of the most in the tensions.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for sharing both the good and bad of tensions and sharing some of your honest experiences and lessons learned. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Natalia, Sebastian, Marivi, and Barbara. And Alex, the final word is to you, but thank you so much for having us.
No, thanks to all of you. Thanks for the people that joined today the call. And thanks for talking about tension, which is something very important for product managers to manage. I hope you all
Thanks
have
so much for watching.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Alex,
Thank
for
you.
having us.
Thank
Bye.
you very much.
Bye.
Cheers, Mark.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.
Cheers.